We're back with the Costello Coaching Podcast. I'm Tommy Costello with a great friend of mine, Tito Ramirez. Tito is a fountain of knowledge that has experience in all aspects of taking care of human bodies in terms of sports performance, and has really dove into some deep research to understand how to help youth athletes in specific. Spending his career working with the top professionals in all sports, basketball, football, baseball, golf, soccer, seeing the top-ranking professionals, he has helped treat their bodies and has become a gold standard of physical therapy with those athletes. Now, as we look at those causes of injuries at that type of level, we understand that it is birthed in the youth development and youth sports. So our goal and our mission today is to help educate those people and understand what they can be doing at a young adolescent's age in order to prevent those injuries longer down the line, and what they can do in the current moment to keep them most safe and most protected as they're playing at their youth sports level. All right, Tito. So in your world of working with high level athletes, some of the best athletes to play in their respective sports of all time, these guys that you've treated, now you're going back and looking at some of the root causes of injury and how these injuries are happening to these athletes later in their life. The two different people that I'm thinking about are a youth soccer player, typically female soccer player, and a young baseball player. So let's use the young baseball player and talk about elbow injuries.
Sure.
And then let's use the youth soccer player, female soccer player, and talk about ACLs.
Yeah. Perfect.
Super prevalent.
Sure.
The amount of ACL injuries in youth soccer players, youth female soccer players
100%.
is astronomical.
Right.
And then the elbow injuries, as we'll get into, from 2015 are up 30% with 14 to 19-year-old pitchers. So why is this happening?
Well, look, there's a couple of things, and I think that there's a few issues. That when you look at the risk factors that are in play for girls' youth soccer and for baseball, it's not univariate analysis, meaning that there's not just one cause that we can look at that across the board would account for all of the injuries, the ACLs and the elbows. But even though the cause is multifactorial, the solutions on the shoulder side in youth baseball has actually been successfully addressed through an exercise program. And the exercise program for the shoulder that most, and that there's not just one exercise program, I should say, doing specific shoulder exercises, Jaeger bands, I'm sure, I mean, you're in this space, you see Jaeger bands all over the place all the time. The Thrower's 10 is another big one that kids use a lot. And we know that the incidence of shoulder injuries is going down.
Yep.
At the Major League Baseball level and at the youth level, like, we're getting a good handle on that. And your idea, when you first said we're looking for the causes, and that's really the passion of what most people in the space like me would be trying to find. You're not going to find very many people, chiros, physical therapists, athletic trainers, that are interested in just treating the symptoms. Most of us are really passionate about finding the cause. And I think having seen success on the shoulder side, it gives us some hope that we could have an impact on the elbow side. I do think that the elbow side, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, so to speak. We haven't done things specifically for the elbow the way that I think that we can. But look, there's a lot of reasons why these kids have these injuries. Volume is one, fatigue is one, year-round play, early specialization. Like, all of these things are data-driven. With the females, most certainly, there's a wide body of research on the ACLs, but there are what we call modifiable risk factors here too, where we look at volume, we look at strength, we look at neuromotor control and proprioception, and all of these things that we can affect. And I think that that's where somebody like me really puts our time and our focus. Like, what are the risk factors that I can modify? How can I help keep, not only professional athletes on the field more, but younger athletes? And I think you hit the nail on the head with the increase in number of UCLs at a youth population. The most at-risk ACLs are youth female soccer players. Like, that's widely seen in the literature. And we as a profession, we understand more clearly now the mechanisms of injury, and I'm fortunate in my career to have seen the protocols really shift, both in the shoulder and the knee. Yeah. What we do now is not what I did when I graduated in 2003. and it's because we understand the mechanisms better. But we still have a long way to go with really permanently making some drastic changes, like we did with the shoulder, in the elbow, and in the knee.
Yeah, so when you're talking about some of the exercise protocols, taking this research and making sure that it's distributed properly, I like thinking of kind of the way that I've set up my business and what I'm doing as an implementation for utilizing the research and then implementing it with the athlete.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, I'll use a situation. So last night we're having practice, and there's a boy, great arm, strong, athletic kid, one of the heavier kids on the team, one of the taller kids on the team, most physical. I have the boys, part of their pre-throw routine, we're doing shoulder stability.
Uh-huh.
So for those who don't understand, the glenohumeral head is just the spot in the shoulder where the youth athlete is most susceptible because they lack stability in that mobile joint. And what's happening there is we need to create stability in the shoulder girdle in order to prevent the injuries in the elbow.
Yeah, and it's very tricky.
It's tricky. It's hard to do that
Yeah.
Because form is one thing where people really struggle with something like that. So if you're listening to this, try to follow along. A low bear position is just if you went on your hands and knees on the ground like you're about to crawl like a baby, and you bring your knees 2 inches off the ground and you keep your back level, okay? And so I'm looking at all these boys. We're holding a low bear position for 45 seconds. Pretty manageable position. It should be easier than what you would think of as like a front plank.
You did low bear with all your kids?
We do them all the time.
DNS out with the youth? I love it.
Yeah.
All right, good.
So a bunch of 13-year-old baseball players.
That's awesome.
And before they play catch, we do, I like thinking of it as training them. So we warm up, but then we go through 10 minutes of speed training. So we're just doing exercises, drills, working on speed.
Lower extremity, like running speed or like velo speed?
No, running.
Yeah, okay.
So we just kind of get their VO2 max, and then we get their blood flow. And then we go into what would be considered more of like an arm care routine. But this is simple stuff. We have bands that go around their wrist,
right?
You know, like TheraBand, and we have them go through different DNS warm up, arm circles with the glove, really just shoulder stability stuff. So, anyways, back to this kid that's the big, strong, physical kid. He's had shoulder problems in the past. And so we have the kids do 3 sets of 45-second low bear alternated with a child's pose to lengthen the lats and really just give them a rest. And the one kid that really struggled with it was the most physical kid. You know, he couldn't hold that position for more than maybe 30 seconds.
Oh.
And you go, wow.
Did his shoulder blades start like popping through his skin and his shirt and all that?
And his butt just kind of kept coming up.
Yeah.
And then he was like, oh, you know, like shaking it.
Yeah.
And so what that really shows is, man, that athlete really lacks stability in that spot.
Yeah. And
so for, you know, the coaches that I grew up around or the coaches that I played for, they're going to neglect that, not even know to look for that. And it's, just give your arm a rest. Go give your arm a rest.
Yeah.
Or go do this. And these are like simple things that you could do to almost run your own test and say like, hey, is this athlete stable here? Could he hold a T position on a bench for 1 minute and 30 seconds without dropping his arms? Or is scap sufficient enough to hold that?
Yeah.
Is he strong enough to hold a low bear position? And if not, that's okay. Let's really focus on stabilizing that and being strong there.
Identifying it's huge, right? Like
because people don't know how to identify.
Right.
Well, so then you can really monitor and track his arm.
And is he's your hardest thrower on your team?
One of, yeah.
And see, that's the challenge.
Most baseball coaches would say that kid's arm's strong.
Right.
And it's not.
Right. It's compensatory in a compensatory way. He's
got great compensation patterns.
Right. He's putting some pop on the ball, but we would argue that, you know, because that's really indicative of either a weak serratus anterior or a serratus anterior that he's not able to use very effectively. And those sometimes aren't the same thing. Sometimes we see a functional test like that and we make the immediate assumption that there's weakness, which a lot of times there is. Sometimes it's just a brain serratus
connection.
It's a connection issue, and the solutions are different there. But identifying that the scapula is winging when it should not be winging, and that he's shaking like that, and he's really struggling, and you know, his butt tucking under like that. That's another way to like get out of that low bear and like turn your abs off. So those to somebody, and that's why somebody like you, I think that understanding the DNS world and understanding baseball and putting those pieces together is such a rare skill set, because most people don't have the background in baseball or don't have the background in DNS. Having both of those for you, I think, is a separator. Because I can't think of there's not many pro teams that are going to be put. I know the Arizona Diamondbacks for a while had some guys on their staff that had a lot of DNS
Padres
stuff.
too.
Padres. Yeah. Okay. So when you're
Padres.
talking about a handful of Major League Baseball teams that are into this DNS and up to date on this kind of stuff, and they're using it, right?
So
which I think is great. That's awesome for your kids.
I mean, my trip last week to Arizona, going out and servicing all the professional big league players, taking them through. What do you think their favorite thing to do was?
What was it?
The DNS flow.
Oh,
A 25 to 30 minute DNS flow, going through different variations of patterns and movements, like breathing, all of it. Like, they were so about it, because not so much of while they're doing it, like, did it excite them all that much, but when they stood up and the way their CNS was firing, like, man, was their response. They wanted that. So what did they all text me? Hey, you got any videos on that flow?
Yeah.
And what we're talking about right now, DNS, Tito, I was fortunate enough early in my career that Tito had guided me to go learn from pretty much what I think of as the world leader in sports rehabilitation. From the Czech Republic, they've created this school of thought called dynamic neuromuscular stability. And really, the focal point is the diaphragm, and how stable is the diaphragm, and how does our air flow through the diaphragm first there. In layman terms, Tito, you can kind of correct me where I'm wrong, but as an athlete, the way that I interpret it as an athlete, first try to deliver the message to the athlete so that we're speaking the same tongue,
Right.
is a lot of times mobility exercises will be great for independent spots on the body, where the DNS is more of an integration of the whole system.
Yeah.
And
the breath too.
And the breath being part of the system.
Right.
So I think the response to the body is, man, I feel loose, I feel great, I feel mobile, like I just did an hour of mobility, even though I only did a 15-minute routine.
Right. Yeah, and I think that for years, I think that the people in the Czech Republic and the Prague School of Medicine, which is where this was born with a neurologist named Vladimir Janda, and Janda started. This is a guy who is accustomed to, or was accustomed to, treating patients in a very different way than you would have here in the United States. When somebody has an injury in Prague, the physios and the neurologist, like, they see patients together in the same room at the same time. It's not a separated, it's not an independent situation where somebody's handling diagnostics and MRIs and CTs and medications, and then somebody else is handling rehabilitative function. Like, these two humans are like putting their brains together, and they both have their hands on the patient. So Yanda's, I think, big contribution to the world was recognizing that in his traumatic brain injury stroke patients, that there was real similarities with the spasticity that he saw with traumatic brain injury and strokes, and the general population with just postural tightness. And he started to really document this, and he started to put forth in the world exactly what you're talking about, which is this idea that you're saying, hey, look, I put these guys through a mobility DNS flow, right? Which a DNS flow is breathing, and it's a lot of primitive movement patterns, rolling and getting up on your side. And the idea that Janda was putting forward was that you can't separate, and this is Tito's words, and I will always, for whoever's listening, and we'll put research articles below for you guys to look at here, but if it's my own opinion or my interpretation, I'll tell you. If it's research we're going to quote, I'll quote it for you. But
sure.
My interpretation of Yanda's big push forward was that you can't separate the musculoskeletal system, meaning just muscles and tendons and joints, away from the central nervous system. And you think about, you walk into a hospital right now, and that's the way, in this country, that's the way we treat it. Like, there's a neurology section, there's an orthopedic section, there's geriatrics, there's OB-GYN, like, there's all these different units in the hospital, but the body doesn't function that way.
Yep.
But on the Western side, exactly what you're saying is a paradigm that we have to overcome. The idea that individualized joint range of motion is totally and completely separate from motor control was something that Janda spoke directly against. And his big contribution was this idea of the motor unit, the central nervous system, brain, spinal cord, the peripheral nervous system with the nerves, and all of the muscles that are connected in that unit. So you could think of it more like all of the lights in your kitchen that are powered by a single fuse or a single breaker in the box, right?
Yeah.
That's one unit. You can't
turn on each individual light.
Yeah, you can't just go work on a light bulb if there's an issue with something going on at the breaker box, right? So his idea was like, you can't separate these things. They don't function separated. They function 100% of the time together. The brain is trying to choose which muscles to turn on and which muscles not to turn on. And it does that with these muscles in a group, and these muscles don't turn on without the central nervous system. So trying to separate them really isn't helpful. So anyways, I think that when somebody like you on the strength conditioning coaching side has that information and they give it to an athlete, it's like a game changer for them, because that's the way our bodies were designed to function. They can stand up and they're like, oh yeah,
I feel different. Exactly.
Yeah, that's a huge deal.
Just go into a little depth on phasic versus tonic muscles too.
Yeah. So that was the other thing. So specifically speaking, and you can Google this, or we'll put a link below. Yonda split the body into tonic and phasic muscles. This is a term that comes out of that school of thought. And he termed tonic muscles that had increased tone just at rest. And he started to just group them, like the muscles that most typically would get tight if somebody had a central nervous system insult, or just posturally were prone to tightness, right? Because we were saying like people with traumatic brain injury and the normal population. And Yonda's big thing was this group of tonic muscles. Like if I start naming them, well, let's do it this way, Tom. Yeah. This is a great question that you asked. I'm just going to name the muscles, and then people listening can start thinking if you would typically want to stretch these or strengthen them. So if I say to you, the muscles on the backside of your neck at the base of your skull, your pecs, your biceps, your shoulder internal rotators, your scapular downward rotators, your lumbar spine hyperextensors, your hip flexors, your hamstrings, your calves. If you start to hear that list of muscles, it's like most people as a pregame routine are going to be stretching hip flexors, stretching hamstrings, stretching and opening up the chest and the shoulders, and kind of stretching the muscles on the backside of the neck and the hip flexors. Tonic. Those are muscles that are prone to tightness.
Yep.
Right? And then he noticed that there's another group of muscles that are prone to weakness, and they're phasic. And that was the term that he came up with. Phasic meaning that they...
Subscat.
Yeah. So these are muscles that would be external rotators, infraspinatus, and the deep
Teres
layer
minor.
of the abdominal wall, teres minor, exactly, deep neck flexors. Pelvic floor, diaphragm, like all of these muscles that glutes.
Big time.
Glutes are huge, right? So it's like those are the muscles that people have a hard time getting at, but when we go to the gym, those are the muscles that we want to strengthen our core, we want to strengthen our glutes, but it's not always that easy for everyone. And so understanding the tonic phasic component of motor control and issues that come from somebody being tonic phasic. In fact, there was the kid that you just sent me who had the UCL surgery on his arm. His dad is that's a great family, by the way. They're such nice people. Every time I go there, they try to feed me, and they gave me some great chocolate cake the other day that wasn't vegan, and I cried a little bit when I ate it. It was fantastic. Yeah. But the dad and I were talking about his son, and we were talking exactly about this. And I said, okay, look, let's just do a little test on him. So I just did a phasic facilitation on his non-surgical arm, left side, and I had the dad do and he's a cardiothoracic surgeon for peds, right? So
pediatric.
Pediatric. So this is a medical professional. He's
highest
level.
Yeah,
he's very intelligent. So I'm like, and he's not a esoteric touchy-feely. So I'm like, okay, just pick up his leg, see how high it goes before you start to feel resistance on his hamstring, like you're going to do a stretch. So he does it on both legs, and I did phasic facilitation, just burned
on his
out
arm.
On his son, on his left arm. So then he's going to retest his son. And we retested, and the straight leg raise was a massive, drastic difference.
Yeah, it was CNS.
Right. So it's like, okay, so
central nervous system.
We did not. Yeah, it's the central nervous. We did not stretch his hamstrings. We didn't touch those. We were on his arm.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are patients that need to be tested.
Do you understand what he's saying? Okay, so I'm just going to slow it down just so that people can kind of get this. So when we're looking at phasic or tonic muscles, so those are just two different identifiers. So tonic muscles being the muscles that are always turned on, pecs, hamstrings, calves. Think of the muscles that easily get sore and easily get tight in the gym.
Right.
Okay. Then if you look at the phasic muscles, those are the muscles that are typically hard to train.
Prone to weakness too.
It's hard to tap someone into the glutes properly. It's hard to tap someone into their posterior chain, so like their posture.
Their deep abdominal wall, breathing, diaphragm, like the whole thing.
All the things that are tough to cue.
Yeah.
So if you go to the gym and you train and it's like, man, I'm trying to work this part of my core, but I can never feel it turn on, it's probably a phasic muscle.
Yeah.
So now what Tito is talking about with the athlete, he has a tight hamstring, okay? So if we're identifying if it's a phasic or tonic muscle, it's a tonic, right?
Right.
So the hamstring's tonic. So what he did was he took the bicep and he took his arm. He took his left arm, even though that we had a tight right hamstring.
Yeah. So this one was we did infraspinatus, supinators, finger extensors, triceps. So those were the ones I.
So
hit
you were
hard.
turning on his phasics.
Yeah, hard concentric, eccentric, really
So
hard.
so basically, he's firing up the whole phasic component
Right.
of his left arm. So he's getting the brain, essentially the nervous system, to fire to that part of the body.
Right.
What then happens when the phasic muscles are properly firing is the tonic muscles loosen up.
Right. And Yonda's thing is that you can't turn up both tonic and phasic at the same time. You can't do it. It's not possible for the brain to. It's either going to have most of its attention paid to the tonic side or most of its attention paid to the phasic side. If people are doing things that require work on the tonic side, it could be something as simple as sitting at their computer.
Yep.
If you're holding yourself with a bunch of tonic muscles as you type or whatever you're doing, the brain is paying attention to tonic muscles.
Yep.
And it will have a very hard time getting at phasic muscles. But you can flip it, which is what we did with him, right?
Yeah.
You just force the body phasic, 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 and then the tone on the tonic side goes down, which is why the DNS flow works so well.
Exactly. So it's like a hack. So
Yeah,
having this DNS flow is a hack.
It is a hack because you can make the brain go phasic, phasic, and
I got a great one for you. Let me give you another story of an athlete. So left-handed pitcher with the Marlins, absolute stud, finished second in the Rookie of the Year, all-star pitcher, and then has struggled with injuries for the past 2 years. 6'7" lefty, anterior chain injuries on his throwing arm. So a little front of the shoulder, a little bicep, a little forearm, and also. But what happens with throwers, and we'll get into this. I had great 2 weeks with him. He hasn't felt this good throwing in the past 2 years, he told me. Utilizing the DNS flow to help him kind of be connected to the body, open it up the right way, but then also a cue that he was missing on. So with a thrower, if we think about, and you don't have to like go down the rabbit hole and, we don't have to talk about the actual the energy system, but think about it this way. If the energy started in the left foot for a left-handed thrower, where his foot is on the mound, as the energy was traveling up the kinetic chain, so as the energy was traveling up, he was losing energy through his diaphragm. He was super upper breathing patterns in his upper
like
chest.
an open scissors with his ribs.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we call that hourglassing. So he had a ton of hourglassing through his rib cage, wasn't getting airflow through his diaphragm. As the energy was traveling up, he was then leaking forward down the mound. So he was in his quad. He was quad dominant, phasic or tonic.
Yeah. So the quad is phasic.
Okay. So the quad is phasic. And then in the right lat is tonic.
Yeah.
So what happened was he was at leg lift, he was falling down the mound. And in order to make up for the lack of rotation from his hip and his core, he was using his right shoulder to create torque. And more specifically, his right lat.
Like pulling down really hard to like...
Pulling down really hard and then creating acceleration through the front of his arm in order to create the velocity. So he was generating torque with his right lat and then trying to make up for arm speed because his arm was so late with his bicep.
See, this right there, what you just said, is a great test question for anyone that's like taking DNS or anything, because I can tell you what they would say the fix would be. So
Okay.
go ahead. I'll put it in my head and I'll just see.
So it's one thing, and my thing, like when it comes to these ball players, is like I was fortunate to be one of them.
Yeah.
So I can speak their language, and they share the people who sent me to work with him had shared his injury history with me. He didn't share anything with me. And he lifts to make his first throw in catch play. And I'm 40 feet away. And he falls right into this movement pattern. And I'm like, shit.
Yeah.
So first throw, this guy doesn't know me. I'm some young kid that's supposed to know something about biomechanics. And he makes the first throw to me. And I'm like, okay, don't be a dickhead and say something right away. Yeah. So then he throws the next one to me. I'm like, fuck.
You couldn't take it anymore.
Yeah, I got to say something. So then he
two throws in.
Yeah, 2 throws in. And he's like throwing him at like 50 miles an hour. You know, he's just lobbing them. And then he makes the third throw. And I look at him and I just say, can I help you with something? Like, is that okay? Like, I know it's premature. And he looks at me. He's like, yeah, of course. What? And so I go over and I look at the position of his foot. First things first about his foot.
Yeah.
He's collapsed to the inside edge.
Oh, yeah.
So he has no connection with the outside edge of his foot. He has no connection with really like the pad of his foot. And I teach the throwers, get connected to the pad of your foot. Yeah. So we first connect him to the pad of his foot. Next thing was I want him to externally rotate his knee to fire the glute med. So move his knee out and then get him to connect to that left glute so that it can help him with the rotation of his hip. Yeah. So we get him connected there in the ground, knee out, glute on. I said, all right, now just from there, lift, let your momentum take over, and then square up your hip to me when you go to throw. Do everything else the same. And he, like I said, he was throwing 55, 60 miles an hour, maybe at 50, 60 feet. He does nothing different with his intention. Comes out of his hand, no more effort, probably 65, 70 miles an hour. Yeah. Got up on me. And he looks at me with like the biggest eyes, like, what the hell was that? Yeah. And I was like, listen, you were on the inside part of your foot. Yeah. You spun with your lat to generate torque. This is where your body wants to create the torque, right here in the ground, right here in the glute, and let your torso throw the ball.
Yeah. 80%. So we'll put this study in. 80% of what's on the baseball is coming away from the arm. If you see an athlete like that that's really over-reliant on the front side and trying to pull that arm through in a situation like that, I mean, there's a lot of us that would make an argument that that's a recipe for tearing the shoulder or the elbow up or both. Mm-hmm. You really have to, that 80% coming away from the ball, like, it takes a real keen eye.
Okay, so now here, let me get into a rabbit hole on this. So this is where taking the information from studies and smart people like yourself, like anyone who studies this stuff and is so invested in it for their athletes, and translating this terminology to the player, okay? So when players hear that 80% of the velocity comes away from the arm, 20% comes from it. Well, 20% still does come from the arm. So that means we are going to create some sort of force and power and acceleration from the arm. Yeah. Now, this is where I've gotten in the last 2 months with throwers. So this is new information that has worked extremely well at the highest level of baseball, all the way down to the 13, 14-year-old level. My thought pattern on this is recent, but it goes like this. The lower body puts you in position for success. So it puts you in position for success. The torso, the hip, and the arm throw the ball hard. Meaning this, a lot of times people try to generate the force in the throw with their lower body. But the reality is, why can a shortstop backhand a ball, jump in a hole, and throw it all the way 140 feet in the air all the way to the first baseman? Yeah. You can't tell me he threw it with his legs. Yeah. He was up in the air. Right. He had no ground connection. But what you can tell me is that the legs can put you in the right position to accelerate safely with your torso, so your diaphragm, your oblique sling, your core, and then let your pec fire and utilize that front side of your body that creates the acceleration to create the velocity to the zone. Sure. And that has helped these guys so much, because I think the misconception is that they're trying to generate the force with their legs. And the reality is, no, like, don't be so forceful in your legs. Let your legs keep you in the right position to accelerate with your upper body extremities.
And I think when you were in high school, when was it that we first started working together?
As an athlete?
Well, no, I'm thinking of when I went out to the high school with you when you were throwing. That was when you were at UOP, right? That was when you were.
Yeah, I might have been at Washington.
Yeah, I think you may have been, because that was, you came back jacked, which is what I think you got jacked at Washington, like you were ripped.
Yeah, maybe, probably.
But I remember I remember working with you on a lot of foot stuff in that point. But I see, like, when you're looking at an athlete who's throwing and they're having issues on the upper extremity side, the way that I term it to athletes is I see energy kind of like leaking out or lost energy that we could go back. Like the foot starting in an already pronated position and the knee internally rotated. It's like, well, you've taken away some of like the momentum that you could have created by having the foot start in a neutral position and then move down into pronation and internally rotate a little. Like all of those things from the ground up are potential energy creators. When somebody starts at the end of the position, it's like, well, now we just lost all of the velocity that could have come from these other places, or it leaks out through their abs, right? They'll like
thoracic extension.
Yeah, thoracic, and their ribs open up, and then this.
You know what's really weird?
Comes out above
I had two
belly button.
Dodgers pitchers. They're teaching this like massive amount of thoracic extension for the smaller throwers. So both guys are under 6 feet tall. Both guys threw north of 97. And they wanted the player to really extend throughout.
Yeah, so there's research on that. I'll put that link in here. That's probably data-driven, actually.
No, it 100% is data-driven because I know who the coach who actually is teaching it was on this podcast.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's elite thinker. They're kind of mirroring guys who throw the javelin with the way that they create the extension through the thoracic spine.
Right.
But anyways, kind of went down a rabbit hole on that. I want to bring up this study that we've both talked about, and I've shared this with my families who work with me. But there's been over 40,000 kids to toe the rubber at Williamsport. So in the existence of the Little League World Series in Williamsport, there's been over 40,000 players to toe the rubber at Williamsport. Out of those 40,000, you're listening to this podcast, like give me a number right now in your head. 40,000 of the best 12-year-olds.
Yeah, that have played at baseball at Williamsport across about, I think it was 42,000 that had played.
Up to 2018. So even more than
2018,
that.
So now it's been more, right?
Okay, now out of those players, how many have pitched in the big leagues? Well, there's been 5.
Right. Yep.
And there's been 3 Americans, 2 international players.
Yep. 1 from Venezuela, 1 from Taiwan, and 3 from the U.S.
So if you think of the great 12-year-old who's going to be the next Bryce Harper because he's pitching at Williamsport and playing at Williamsport, the odds of him pitching in the big leagues are actually low. Really, really, really low. And actually, I don't know what the percentage is, but 5 out of 42,000 is probably less than what it is to actually your chances overall of making the big leagues.
And look, so then that brings us into like
why?
So that's what I was just going to say. That brings us into this huge multifactorial rabbit hole of, there's a huge contingency on the rehab side that feels very strongly that this is almost 100% a volume issue because the kids are playing baseball year round, right? So there's a lot of studies around that, and we can put those in here. One of the ideas here is that if the kids don't take a break, and you can look on the USA Baseball website, which is another stat that's interesting. There was a study that looked at how many people were aware of these safety guidelines, right? So 85% of the kids are not aware, 60% of the parents are unaware of pitch counts and the safety guidelines, and then 60% of the coaches don't abide by them. So whether or not they're aware of them or not, they were just doing, in the study, they were just looking to see like if they were
Who
abiding.
follows the rules.
Yeah, so most don't. Most people don't know. Most people don't follow. So there's a huge database on USA Baseball and the MLB website that you can go to, and we'll put the link here. And you can see by age how many pitches should be thrown in a 12-month calendar period, how many pitches should be thrown per game, if X number of pitches are thrown, how many days of rest there would be. So, I mean, there's a huge rabbit hole with a lot of factors on how to protect these kids. Volume is a big one. But we know, like, countries like Japan have not been very forthcoming with data. Like our data and data that comes from other sports in other countries, soccer in Europe, like we're very open with that data. The Japanese recently did open up with some studies out of Japan, and it was very interesting to see. It is a huge honor for those kids to pitch for their region.
Country,
for like, even if the kid is coming from a certain region in Japan and they're representing their area at a very young age, it's a huge, huge, huge honor, and the pitch counts are high for these kids.
Yeah.
To the point where when those kids go pro, their data that they released was like usually they have an injury that takes them out on the upper extremity side inside of 8 months.
Mm-hmm.
That's I mean
because they're so worn out.
Right. It's like tread off the tires, basically.
So and there's going to be tread no matter how you look at it. So we got to keep the most amount of tread on them, really.
Yeah.
I want to kind of reframe this. So when we go back to the 12-year-olds pitching the Little League World Series, why do so many few of the greatest 12-year-olds in the world make it to the professional ranks of the big leagues? And my number one thought process on this is understanding the windows of trainability. So Tom House is credited with kind of figuring out what these windows are, but I totally abide by them and love them because it paints a real clear picture. And what he says is from 9 to 14 is fundamental flexibility and neurological development. So understanding in terms of neurological development, understanding what the game is, how the game is played, strategy, gamesmanship, all these things. And then obviously like hand-eye coordination, cognitive function. And then you go into fundamental flexibility. That's kind of what we were talking about when we started the podcast, shoulder stability, flexibility, once again, coordination. And then you go 14 to 19. The second window is all about strength and power. So from 14 to 19, how strong can you get? Then from 19 to 26 is skill acquisition. So how fine-tuned can you get with the strength and power that you've generated? And from 26 and beyond, window of trainability 4, credit that with retention, fast twitch retention. So can you maintain your fast twitch? And, getting the opportunity to work with...
maintain your fast twitch in over a fatigued period, like over a number of throws period?
Like as you age.
And as you age, okay.
You naturally lose your fast twitch. How do you retain that fast twitch?
Yeah, I see.
Because your strength and power is developed. If you're playing at the age of 30, you're probably really elite. So your skills have been acquired.
Yeah.
They call it skill retention, fast twitch retention from 26 and beyond.
Yeah.
So I think of Tom Brady. You think of these athletes that have played a really long time, and they retain their skill, and they retain their fast twitch. So now you go back to a 12-year-old. Well, the model's broken. If you're super elite at 12, and there's nothing wrong with winning, there's nothing wrong with competing, there's nothing wrong with being the best player in the world at 12, but the problem is you probably are already at window 3 where you're trying to master the perfect curveball, you're trying to master the perfect sequence in a pitching sequence, you're trying to master all the things that should be happening 10 years down the road in order to win that game when you're 12. Now, if you give a simple breakdown, and we ran the numbers ourselves, and we looked at pitch counts, we looked at teams played, we looked at these kids that went to the Little League World Series, and you can do the math on your own, but it comes out to a rough number of about 2 pitchers per team that make it to the Little League World Series throw around 1,800 competitive pitches in a calendar year.
Oof. Now,
that's 3 times the recommended amount by USA Baseball guidelines. So these kids that were idolizing and putting up on ESPN and, highlighting and rewarding for their, 100-pitch outings, 75-pitch outings time and time again from February through August, and then they go play fall ball after that, you begin to understand why from 2015 and up, why Tommy John is up over 30% with that population, 14 to 19. Because they're missing their window of neurological development, fundamental flexibility, strength and power acquisition, and they're skipping right to skill acquisition.
Yeah, and listening to that, there's like so many. I'm looking through all of my baseball studies here at so many things that you brought up there. There's I don't know. There's probably 20 studies we could quote.
Yeah.
Just on that, But looking specifically, one of the biggest things that to me is such a problem is that number for the elbow is not going down, right? So there was studies done that looked at the incidence of UCL injury and Tommy John surgery and overall DL days, including the shoulder and the elbow, and they noted, and this study I think was done in 20. I'll have to go back and look. I think it ended in I'll go back and look before I quote it. But anyways, shoulder injury was down. Elbow injury at that point was climbing in Major League Baseball. And the number of days that guys were going on the DL was going up every year. But Major League Baseball came up with an answer because now That's not the trend in Major League Baseball. The trend in Major League Baseball is shoulder injuries are down.
Yep.
Elbow injuries have dropped not to 0, but to about 29 a year in Major League Baseball. Well, there's 30 teams, so you got just under 1 a team on average, right?
In about 2015, it was just over 2, right?
Yeah. So this has really made like
in the
Major
last
League
10
Baseball,
years have made massive strides.
Huge difference. And look, like we know that the velocities didn't go down.
They went up.
They went up. So when these studies, when they were looking at these numbers, like it wasn't like the velocity went down, the velocity went up. And now the velocities are even up higher. And I think that the idea that the shoulder injuries are down and the elbow injuries are down is something that gives me hope. Like Major League Baseball has figured something out that we have not yet put into youth sports. And that's, I think, for somebody like me and any of you out there that are spending time with professional athletes, football, baseball, basketball, soccer, volleyball, whatever it is, you can see the difference very, very clearly on how much programming and care goes into taking care of a pro athlete versus how much care goes into taking care of a 12-year-old, 13-year-old travel baseball player or female soccer player. Like it's not the same, but the volume on these kids is so high, like arguably just as high as they would be getting if they were playing at a pro level. And so I think for somebody like me, there's a lot of rehab professionals that want to help this population. We feel very passionate about helping this population. And I think that a lot of the things that you were saying, like there's such a huge amount of data on what people think should be done. Here's a very simple one that I absolutely love. If you just take that young kid and just increase the repertoire of his pitches, each new pitch decreased UCL injury by 33%.
So acquire a changeup.
And that was one of the big ones that they could acquire. The other thing that was interesting to me is like most of the time, if you were to say across the board, hey, what pitch do you not want a kid to throw until they're a certain age? And it usually is going to be a curveball, right? They're going to be like fastball. But in terms of stress on the elbow, the most stressful pitch was a fastball.
Yeah.
Then the curve. So it's
Let me give this. You know why the curveball isn't? You know what kind of motion we've been doing for the last ever since we were in existence as humans?
What's that?
Banging a hammer. That's the curveball motion. Okay? So people who think that the curveball ruined the elbow, they got it wrong.
Yeah, it's not.
It's the acceleration, the valgus force of pronating that arm through.
On the fastball. Yeah, and look, like the throwing is just, I'll just say, like, I know that we're
violent on an arm.
It's not healthy for an arm. Like, it just isn't. Look, it might be one of the fastest human motions in the literature. That's what they say. They really have a hard time because the rotational velocity of the arm coming through, if you let the arm just spin like this for 1 second and just let it rotate, it would rotate almost 20 times. The rotational velocity is 7,000 degrees per second. So it's like so if
let me break that down. If your arm was on a spigot,
and
there was no muscles,
arm and just like spin it like this, and my arm could just spin like a wheel around.
What kind of is that, like a 90-mile-an-hour fastball?
I have to go back and look at the studies. I think that was somewhere in the 80s for a ball.
So if you were to throw a ball, let's just say 80 miles an hour, boom, and you accelerate through, and there was nothing to stop it, your arm would spin around its shoulder 20 times before it naturally stopped.
In 1 second. In 1 second. That's how fast this is happening. So there's so many factors on what we need to do to protect that. I listen, like, I would love to just sit with guys like Tom House that just specialize in throwing and talk with them. One of the big questions that I have and that I really want to dive deep into is we need to do more than what we're doing specifically for the elbow. Like specifically, when I first got into the space in rehab, people told me, hey, if you can fix the shoulder and the shoulder blade, you'll fix the arm. And it's like, okay, well, we fixed the shoulder and the shoulder blade and the injuries went down there and the elbow injuries are going up and they're not like leveled off. They're going up. Like there's some studies that show 9-10% per year between 15 to 19-year-olds or 14 to 20-year-olds. So it just depends on the studies that you're looking at that, but they're still increasing in this population. That population accounts for somewhere between like 57 to 68% of the total
throwers.
UCLs that are done in this country. And so it's like, what can we do to help these guys out? And here's another one that I would say to you. Do you think it's realistic that across the board, let's just look at what we started with, soccer and baseball. Do you really think it's realistic that Tommy and Tito stand up and we say, hey, the volume on these kids is too high. They're playing too many games. They're specializing too early. Here's all the data we have on this. These kids need a 3-month break, no soccer, no throwing baseballs. They're going to rest. They're going to go to the gym and they're going to get strong. Is that ever going to happen?
No.
Okay, it's not going to happen. So I love the studies that point out early specialization isn't great. The volume is too high. These kids are throwing you around. The showcases are dangerous because it's extra load on the arm. That's all true. But the shoulder injuries aren't skating out of control. The elbow injuries are skating out of control, despite the fact that this volume is too high.
Because they're behind. They were so shoulder heavy 20 years ago.
That's what I think. That's my big question. So if we take...
But once again, going back to Yonda, it shouldn't be isolated. That's such a one light bulb in the ceiling rather than looking at the circuit breaker. And if you look at the Yonda system, it's the whole system.
All the way to the hand and wrist. Like if you do Yonda stuff, if you were doing like facilitation stuff for the shoulder, they would be like,
on
prone,
your fingers.
pushing.
That's like when I taught the kids the low bear. I said, you're going to spread your fingers out on the floor.
Right.
You're going to compress your hand into the turf. You're going to roll your shoulders down and back. And you're going to cue on your lats.
Yeah.
And we're going to, that's how the system works though.
Well, and so here's the thing. So with somebody like Tom House, I would love to talk to him because...
I'll call him up for you.
Yeah. Listen, I don't have that kind of pull, but because look, we have data that shows that some of these studies show kids as young as 12 are in this demographic for, I think one of the studies was that kids 12 to 19 accounted for 57 or 58%. So that means that these 12-year-olds were a big enough chunk in this study to account for a massive chunk. They needed to be included in this demographic that was at risk. So what do we do? Because you look at Jaeger bands, you look at driveline plyo ball stuff, even if you're not using it for velo, if you're using it for tendon loading on the shoulder side, why aren't we doing tendon loading progressions on the elbow side in this young population? We don't do it. The rotational velocities are massive. They're super high. We pay all kinds of attention to the shoulder on this. The volume is too high. We try to build the strength on that. And the elbow's like an afterthought. Even if you look at the thrower's 10, the thrower's 10 has this exercise with a light dumbbell, this exercise with a light dumbbell, and this one.
And
the
if you're listening to this, he's wrist curl,
wrist supination, pronation, curls and extensions
with his forearm.
With your forearm with a light weight, well, you're going to be throwing this thing at a rotational velocity of close to 7,000 degrees, an angular velocity of close to 7,000 degrees a second. Like this is not going to cut it.
No, and I think it just kind of like now real 10,000 foot view above. It's not that you lack learners, you lack teachers, and so it's really about educating the teachers, educating the people, and it's funny, like, I kind of want to go here for a second because putting myself in the mix of coaching travel ball, like, it's not something that I really need to do. Like, right. I don't have a desire need to be a travel ball coach, but, like, why? People ask me that in the local community pretty consistently. Like, why are you even doing this? Like, you work with these pros, you do this, you do that. Why are you coaching a 13-year-old baseball team? And I explained to a parent, we had the time to kind of talk about it. And I said, look, when I work with these pros, I know that something is going wrong at this point. At this point, someone is messing up these people. That's what all the research says. So the only way you would know how to fix a situation, no matter all your research, no matter all your optics, no matter all your thought processes, you would have to go get on the ground and figure it out. And I think of things like this. Like my dad shares with me all the time. He always says, get on the ground with the people. Like if you think of a military leader leading from an office somewhere, he doesn't know what those guys feel like on the ground.
Yeah.
And
this is the Eric Ries, like lean startup mentality. Like it's a completely different world, but it's the same thing.
Yeah, it's same concept. So it's like for me, okay, what does it feel like to sit in the travel ball world for 36 months, 24 months, 18 months? Like what does it feel like to sit as a coach in that environment? Take everything that I know about this research and how kids get hurt and how we could actually best prepare them to have the best opportunity from 19 to 26 where their career actually matters.
Yeah.
And the truth is, just after doing it for 4 or 5 months, what happens is you end up succumbing to pressures that are relationship driven. So you want to almost like, as a coach, what I've experienced is you try to appease people. Like a kid wants to go out there and, play and win and compete and do well. And the parents want to see the kids win, and the parents want to see the team do well. And by no means would you pull out your best pitcher and put in the next kid that is going to get his, give up a bunch of hits.
Yeah. Trying to win.
Yeah, and you end up losing the game, and you feel like crap because you're just like, I know we're going to lose the game if I put this kid in.
Yeah.
But I did that. Like, I didn't care.
Yeah.
I told the parents, I said, I feel like a priest that would go home and sin if I did this. Like, I know what's right. I know what's wrong.
Yeah.
And
so you pull the kid that's still throwing well out to put somebody else in just to save the pitch count?
Well, not only save the pitch count, but get the other kid pitch count too, because he needed volume. Like, he was, you know what I mean? Like, that kid needed the volume.
Right. It's a twofold thing. Well, and look, like,
I think, to finish my point, I think talking to the coaches and just understanding like the why behind it, and then how to develop a roster for it. So Gen 1 was the fall time, and Gen 2 is the springtime. So what I did for the second group is I built the roster according to this data. I said, all right, so if we're going to plan out 50-something games.
Did you really?
Yeah. So if we're going to plan out 50-something games from February to August, there's going to be X amount of pitches thrown. We're going to need this many high-quality pitchers that can handle around 500 pitches.
Exactly.
So I went out and grabbed bodies. I grabbed 6 bodies, and if you're not familiar with 13-year-olds, about 135 to 150 pounds is pretty big 13-year-old. And I grabbed 6 bodies that can handle that workload. Then I grabbed 4 or 5 kids that have the potential to throw 250 to 300 quality pitches as like middle infielders, smaller body types, but their workload is going to be lessened because they're not physical enough to handle the peak recommendation. And then now all the innings are accounted for the entire year, but that's how the roster was built around. Now you don't have to succumb to the pressures because you go, well, we will win because these are the best players and they're going to be able to handle this workload, and they're only going to throw this many innings here. They're going to throw that many innings the next month. They're going to throw that many pitches in the following month. And that's how you could devise a roster to win. So when you think of it that way, it's not so much about helping them emotionally with how do you pull a kid out and sacrifice the loss. It's how do you strategically think to build a roster that can handle the workload that you're scheduling. Most people just say, hey, let's go to this tournament. Hey, let's play this game. Hey, let's scrimmage this team.
No,
hey,
100%.
Let's do that. And they don't plan it out.
No, and that's so I would venture to guess, and here again, this is my opinion, and there's no data on this, that you are the only coach in the country that has built how many so let's just think about starting pitchers. You said 6?
Yeah, 6 to 7 kids that can handle. Like physically, you just look at them, they can handle 650 pitches.
Okay, and then you've got another, how many kids that are going to come in to pick up some innings?
4 or 5.
Okay, so you're looking at 10 to 11 kids on your roster that you specifically handpicked, specifically so that they can handle some innings and some pitches for you.
Exactly, and then like you can teach them how to hit and feel the ground ball from there.
You played in, you guys won a Little League World Series with your dad, right?
Yep.
Like and I know your dad. He's a loving guy. He's one of the most.
Okay, now here, ready for this one?
How many?
Matthew Campbell.
Yeah.
Okay? Greatest 12-year-old to ever exist, giving out autographs, the whole deal, throwing 81, 82 miles an hour, like 6'1", 12-year-old, just shoving our way to a World Series, riding him like a freaking stallion.
He was on your team, this kid. Yeah.
Okay. Then there was Easton Lucas. Okay. Easton Lucas was probably 7th in the rotation. Was a good old Tommy Costello ranking there probably at 6th. Okay. And this is our 12-year-old roster. Matthew went on to play Division I baseball, dealt with some arm fatigue and arm injuries.
Mm-hmm.
Easton Lucas pitches for the Oakland A's in the big leagues. He could barely break glass as a 12-year-old. The guy threw 98 and struck out Corey Seager last year in the big leagues.
There you go.
So it's like, what do you want, mom and dad?
Yeah.
What do you guys want out of this?
Well, okay. So look, like I'm trying to find the study here. If a kid goes into the minors and ends up having surgery in the minors because they hurt their arm, do you know the percentage that it decreases their chance of making it to the big leagues ever? Like if they
get an arm injury.
They get an arm injury. So this was a study done by Meister with the Texas Rangers and the Rays. They said that if a pitcher has an injury and has a shoulder surgery in the minors, their chances of making it to the majors decrease by 75%.
What about before pro ball if they had surgery?
Oh, so those studies, like if you have an injury before pro ball, the studies that I look at there is like how long, if it's a UCL, like how long does the UCL last?
Mine lasted 9 years.
8. So 8. So you beat the average. The average is 8. So we can expect a UCL is going to last 8 years. So if a kid falls into the chunk of like
actually 8.
8 is the average.
Yeah, surgery was in a January, and then 8 years later in February, mine ripped.
So you were right on the button. And that's very, very typical for a UCL. So if you look at the age demographic, there's some studies as young as 11 and 12 years old. You tack 8 years onto that, that's the end of it. Like the tread is off the tires at that point. So, I don't know the specific percentage, but if somebody does have a UCL, let's say when they first get drafted, they're going to have about 8 years left, according to the data. Like that's what we would expect to see. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about that you bring up in terms of the way you structured your roster was what happens at a major league level. So there was a course that I did that somebody was giving a talk on pitch counts, and they just were quoting this Fleisberg study that had 10 years worth of data. And they looked at this study comparing like what was happening with these kids, and this trainer from Major League Baseball was talking about like the total pitch counts in baseball, and he was saying, look, with Major League relievers, they're usually trying to get to 75 innings pitched total for a Major League reliever.
And that's a heavy workload.
Okay, and starters would try to hit 200, most hit 150 to 160, right? These kids who feel like, that they should be throwing so much. Like if you look at the way that the data is set up right now, it was, I think when you were younger, I think they were using pitch counts like the kids age times 12 as the multiplier for total pitches thrown. I think right now it's at age times 10 on the USA baseball guidelines. Most rehab professionals in the space would really prefer to see age times 7.
Yeah.
Right.
So it makes sense though. If you're 10 years old, you shouldn't throw more than 70 pitches.
Right. So if you look at Major League Baseball staffs right now, they need their pitchers like to go 80 to 90 innings, and these are fully developed, highly trained, full strength individuals
who have very specific programs and protocols in place.
Yeah.
And staff around them to support them 24/7.
100%. But if you look at what high school kids are pitching, there was a study that came out of Ohio. The pitch counts were set at 120 for those kids. So it's like we don't take care of the kids with the same structure in travel ball. There's not like a coach, a strength coach, a rehab guy associated with the travel team for baseball, for soccer, for any of these sports. And nobody just did what you did, which is, to my knowledge, take a team and build the roster specifically to keep the tread on the tires. Exactly. And I think if that was done in combination with maybe teaching the kids an extra pitch to throw, an arm care program that goes beyond just the shoulder, addresses the elbow as well, and it's like icing on the cake if we can get into the whole kinetic chain and start doing DNS stuff. And
it's everything we're doing. So like we'll see how it works out in 10 years with these 13-year-olds.
Well, I think we need to get studies done. Like I really like legitimately we need to track what we do. So this was when I talked to this guy at USC about doing an ACL study. He said to me, Tito, we need a club that keeps data on how many ACLs and knee injuries they've had currently so that we can see if we have an impact. So that's one thing that I would say to you is like keep track of how many
these kids that come into the
because kids are going to get hurt. It's just like you're not going to take it down to 0. Yeah. But if you know where you're starting and we can compare that to the national average, or where you're starting and you can refine and make it even better, like that's impactful. That's things that the world should know.
In the beginning of this, like and look, you never want anyone to get hurt. And probably the reason why I do this psychologically, like deep internally, is because I did get hurt and I want to help people, right? Like it's just a typical story. But Dr. Elichaj did say something where it kind of helps you cope with it. He's like, this is a very violent motion on the arm. People will get hurt. You're not going to prevent all of them. And for me, I've had few hundred pitchers. We're closing in on 1,000 pitchers that I've worked with, and we've had 2 Tommy Johns. So it's beating the averages, beating the percentages, but
it's like your dad says, your best. What is it that you're best?
You're best equipped to serve the person you once were.
Yeah, and look, so there's so many factors, but just getting the number of innings down is a huge, like over 100 innings. I mean, separate from pitch counts. Separate from pitch counts, just looking at innings. Like if you can get them under 100.
Yeah, I think like the controllable here, what we're talking about is
modifiable risk factors.
Exactly. Like if you go talk to an orthopedic surgeon, the 2 factors that they're going to talk about is volume and intensity. Now, if you're really with someone high level and high level trainer, high level therapist, you're going to look at volume, intensity, density, and collision. And those are some factors that people look at in terms of building the highest end protocols and training programs. But the most controllable factor in those examples would be volume, because anyone can freaking count and say that this number is too much.
And stop.
And regardless of your understanding of biomechanics, regardless of anything, if you can count to 100, you can control the one factor.
Well, and I think that the big thing about year-round play, because look, like I have this list here, causes of fatigue, like lack of preseason conditioning, consecutive days of pitching, excessive pitch counts, year-round play, multiple teams, poor mechanics, stress. If you look at some of these factors, the year-round play and the constancy of the play and the not enough rest, it all is centered around there's throwing too much.
Yep.
So if the kid's going to play for 12 months or 11 months or 10 months, whatever it is, without a break, maybe if we actually do what you're doing and bring the volume down, like maybe then it's okay. Like maybe then we don't see the over fatigue. We don't go in excess of these innings. We don't see the injuries.
I mean, I think the volume should just come down, and you should require someone to play 3 sports until they're 16 years old.
Well, that would be great, but I don't think the paradigm's ever going to shift.
Yeah, but I think the interesting thing that we could keep hammering home, and maybe, if you tell 10 people it sticks with one, is the Dodgers call me, the Padres call me, the Diamondbacks call me, the Pirates call me, the Nationals call, like all these teams talk to me. I talk to their scouting directors because I work with some of the top players that are being scouted. And a consistent topic of conversation, you know when he started just playing baseball?
Yeah.
Is he you were a football player? Did he play football?
Yeah.
Basketball player?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay.
They know the studies because early specialization. So
it's like a largest predictor. Is this guy going to last by the time we pick him?
No, right, because they know that on average, people that only ever pitched in high school started around 12 years old.
Yep.
People that pitched only in high school and college started kind of just still at 12, but closer to 13. And then guys that pitched high school and then either college in the majors or high school and then are in the majors, the average time for specialization or the average age for specialization of a Major League Baseball pitcher is a little over 14. So it's 2 years later.
And this is going to be hilarious, but this will be our last story and we'll wrap it up. A good friend of mine, Trevor Hoffman, he started pitching. He's one of the greatest pitchers to ever pitch in Major League Baseball. Closer, Padres,
greatest walk-in
Bros.
song ever.
Yeah, Hell's Bells, baby. Cue it.
That's I mean,
he's the man.
Fear. Yeah.
But you know when he started pitching?
How old?
When he got cut in Double-A from the Reds as a shortstop.
Oh, really?
He asked to throw batting practice. He hung around to throw batting practice. Couldn't hang up the cleats yet. And wasn't emotionally ready to handle that. Started throwing batting practice to the team for free, just to be a part of it.
Really?
It was like, this kind of feels good out of the hand. Let me go throw a bullpen. 93, 94, 95. Yeah. Hey, maybe we get this guy a little contract for a little Double-A reliever.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, 500 plus, I think 600 saves.
Jeez.
So.
Yeah, starting late is fantastic.
Yeah,
it just is tough. I think, like I said, very humbly, I think sometimes the rehab world, like we see these studies and we know like it's too much on these kids. It's too much volume. But to change travel baseball, travel soccer, travel volleyball, travel basketball, and these kids, the volume goes down across the board, across the country in all of these sports, and everybody's about it. It's like, okay, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you're in
the
trenches.
But you can educate them.
Yeah, if you're in the trenches, like you're in the trenches, like I'm in the trenches, if you're seeing professional athletes and you're seeing these kids, you can say, okay, we can do better than this. And if you know the data, you can start to plug some things in. I love what you're doing with your kids. I love the DNS, but I think more than anything, I love structuring a team to minimize the pitches, the pitch count. Like just make
control the controllable.
100%. Do that for your kids. And look, then I would say like, hey, let's put your kids on a shoulder and elbow program.
They're all on it.
Yeah.
All the kids are on my app.
Yeah.
They have their throwing program.
Yeah.
They have their meal plan. They have their everything.
The arm care stuff. That's what I want to do with, just reach these communities with information that gives them simple solutions. Cause I don't know a parent that I've spoken to. My kids are in travel sports, and when I speak to parents, like they're almost dying to hear information.
Yeah.
They want to hear.
I think there's like two components to it. I think number one, they're have an awareness that something isn't quite right. But then number two, they don't have an answer. And so I think it's our job, like as people that are in the trenches, I take it as my job to number one, educate. And then number two, try to instruct to prevent. So the instruction and the protocols are there to prevent. And how you go about that can be kind of difficult sometimes, but I think that's the hurdle that we're trying to jump over.
And look, I agree. And I think the people that I talk to, and you experience the same thing, it's because of who the athletes are, the athletes that you see are, it gives you so much, like they want to know what you have to say because Tommy saw so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. And so, how do I help my kid? This guy's helping these guys. When you get into conversations like that with parents and anybody who's been in the space and is working with pro athletes, and you see a hungry parent with a kid in the space in any of these sports, just saying like, what can I do? You really see the hunger and the need there. And I feel like if you give these people the information, most of the time they're going to do it. They just don't have the information. They just don't have the data. And then they can't make an intentional decision about how to protect their kid. Very good. So anyways.
Awesome. I think that was great. Yeah. Thank you for doing it.